Alarms stitched the dark as the freighter Halcyon bent under invisible pressure, and a third-person voice tracked Rhys through the smoke as he steadied a trembling bulkhead and listened to the hull groan. Rhys said, "Seal the breach, now." A voice from comms crackled with fear and math. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "Readings are non-local. The field is folding seconds into meters." The deck lurched and a distant corridor appeared older than the rest, rusted like a memory. Rhys said, "Route power to shields. Keep us alive for one more minute." A coded burst hit the sensor mast and drew a glyph that tasted like grief. Elara said, "It is a message, and it is begging us to forget." The name at the footer was a ghost from war. Kale Soren promised order in the ruins beyond the rim. Rhys said, "Cut external links, isolate nav." The hull sang again, and the stars outside smeared like wet paint. The glyph resolved into a map that pointed at a vault orbiting a dead moon. Elara said, "If this is real, it is a weapon that argues with time." The ship shivered, and the old corridor snapped back to fresh steel. Rhys said, "Plot an intercept, but keep the guns cold." The message ended with a single rule written in fire. If found, do not activate. Dawn never came in deep space, but the Halcyon learned a new quiet as repairs clicked like distant rain, and the narrator followed Rhys through the habit loop of command. Rhys said, "Status, all decks." Answers came thin and honest. Elara said, "We are patched, not cured." The message still lay in memory like a shard that wanted a wound. Rhys studied the vault icon and swallowed doubt with coffee that tasted like solder. He knew Kale used certainty as a weapon and silence as a leash. Rhys said, "We go eyes open, guns down." The ship's old scars looked fresh under starlight, and pride tugged at humility. Elara said, "If this device warps causality, seals will not hold meaning." The narrator weighed the word, meaning, until it sagged. The crew strapped in, and the long burn began toward the dead moon. Rhys said, "If we touch it, we lock it away." The quiet felt like a promise that feared itself. Approach vectors tightened until the dead moon filled the view with crater eyes, and the narrator let the silence stretch like taut wire. Rhys said, "Hold at 10,000 kilometers." The vault ring hung above the limb like a coin punched from night. Elara said, "No emissions, yet it speaks." Tiny lens drones slid from the bay and fanned into a halo. The map overlaid a corridor through the ring like a throat. Rhys said, "We drift no thrust inside." The ship glided, and the hull whispered as the ring's gravity braided itself through seams. Elara said, "Interference is temporal, not magnetic." A pulse passed through the frame, and yesterday sat beside the present on a console reflection. Rhys said, "We log everything." The narrator counted breaths and found them out of order, and the ring watched like a judge who had arrested time. The first drone slipped inside the ring and returned data that did not share a clock with itself, and the narrator felt the ship tense like a held breath. Elara said, "Telemetry shows the same second twice." Rhys said, "That is not comfort." The drone's camera saw a chamber beyond, a hollow like a cathedral made for echoes. The walls held mirrors that refused the present. Elara said, "There is a path that prefers those who doubt." Rhys smiled without joy and armed a tether. He said, "We take the slow road." The drone tether hummed as if it had a throat of its own. Readouts danced and settled into a shape that looked like choice. Elara said, "It wants a guardian." The word curled around Rhys and did not let go. They entered on thrusters that whispered respect, and the narrator rode the tremor as the ring accepted the Halcyon with the patience of stone. Rhys said, "Hands on, minds calm." The chamber unfolded like an iris and revealed a cradle at its heart. Elara said, "Field density drops near the core." The glyph returned and asked a question with no words. Rhys stepped to the forward blister and found himself measured. He said, "We are here to keep this safe from every plan, including our own." The ship answered with silence, that felt like trust. The cradle warmed and lit a path to a vault door shaped like a pause. Elara said, "We will need a code made of intent." The narrator believed the ring could hear what choices sounded like. The ship drifted in the cradle's orbit while Rhys paced the bridge, memory dragging him backward into a war he wished he could unmake. The narrator pressed his silence into the room like gravity. Rhys said, "It was a raid gone wrong, and I was the one who signed the order." His voice cracked, though the hull held steady. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "You carry ghosts because you believe they teach, not because they own you." The monitors flickered between present stars and ruined cities from his past. Rhys leaned against steel, breath fogging. He said, "Kale Soren was there, and he lived to claim I broke the code." The thought turned his gut cold. Elara said, "He bends truth like others bend steel. You guard more than this weapon, you guard your own name." The silence stretched as the vault pulsed with unseen light. The narrator bound past and present together, showing how memory made chains stronger than alloy. The crew gathered in the common bay where silence became argument, and the narrator folded their words into the rhythm of machine. Rhys said, "This vault holds something no fleet should touch." A mechanic muttered about survival being worth more than morality. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "If we think only of survival, we abandon what makes us human." The debate grew heavy as old scars surfaced. A younger officer spat, "Why not turn it against Kale before he comes for us?" Rhys clenched fists, remembering firestorms. He said, "Because using it is losing ourselves." The narrator let his words fall like stones in water, ripples chasing through the bay. The tension hung like storm air, but each face showed fear wrapped in resolve. They were not just travelers, but keepers of a secret too large. The vault thrummed in orbit, reminding them that time itself waited for their choice. Night cycle deepened when Malik Vey slipped into shadow, his eyes burning with ambition beneath practiced calm. The narrator tracked his silence as a kind of poison. Malik said, "Rhys talks of honor, but honor will not save us when Kale arrives." He adjusted controls, rerouting data into a hidden channel. Elara passed nearby and paused, unaware of betrayal flowering inches from her. Malik smiled and covered the signal with idle chatter. He said, "Just stabilizing the long-range comms." The narrator measured the distance between his words and his intent, a gulf deep as the void outside. Rhys entered, exhaustion clouding his judgment, and trusted Malik's report without question. Malik said, "All systems nominal." Shadows thickened around him as if the vault itself listened. His ambition coiled tighter, waiting for the moment to strike, while loyalty slipped like water through his fingers. Beyond the hull, a small craft appeared, battered by scars and silence, carrying a lone survivor who had clawed through horrors unseen. The narrator marked his arrival as disruption and warning. Hatch locks groaned open, and Kira Dane stumbled forward, breath ragged. Rhys steadied her with firm hands. Kira said, "The vault is not alone, it has guardians unseen." Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with resilience. Dr. Elara Quinn scanned her vitals, while the crew whispered about omens. Rhys said, "You know its defenses?" Kira shook her head. "I know its hunger. I escaped, but it remembers." The narrator painted her scars as more than flesh, etched warnings carved by survival. The air turned heavier as if her words themselves were iron. They realized the weapon was not waiting to be found, but reaching out to those who dared seek it. The vault pulsed again, this time like a heartbeat pressed into every wall, and the narrator weighed its rhythm against human breath. Screens flared and displayed fragments of mirrored corridors, each out of sync. Kira Dane said, "It shows you what you fear losing." The crew flinched as visions flickered, families, battles, futures yet to break. Rhys steadied them with words that cost him. He said, "It wants to divide us, but we are more than its echo." Dr. Elara Quinn said, "This is no mere weapon, it is a mirror built of time itself." Malik Vey watched and hid his secret smile, thinking of power waiting. The narrator spread dread across the bay like frost, but within the fear, there was unity unspoken. They understood the vault would not just test their strength, it would test their will to remain whole. Across the rim, a warship cut a black line through the stars, while the narrator traced its wake like a judge's pen. Kale Soren stood before a wall of banners that promised order and ash. Kale Soren said, "The ring is a wound, and I will cauterize it." Officers echoed oaths that sounded like chains. He paced with practiced calm, and the deck thrummed beneath his boots. Kale Soren said, "Our scouts placed the Halcyon inside the vault's throat." He raised a gloved hand, and the map bloomed with converging vectors. Kale Soren said, "We do not fire first, we let them open the door." He smiled without mirth, knowing patience sharpens a blade. The narrator noted how certainty gathered around him like armor. Kale Soren said, "When they falter, we step through and write the new clock." In the Halcyon's darkened comms bay, a masked channel opened like a door no one remembered building. The narrator felt caution lean forward as light threaded the air. A figure spoke from shadow, with a voice sanded by exile. "Orin Vale said you stand inside a lock that answers to motive." Rhys kept his breath even, and measured the distance between trust and need. Rhys said, "If you know the key, say it." Orin Vale said, "Keys break locks, intentions set them." The line hissed with quiet storms from old relays. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "What is the consequence of a false step?" Orin Vale said, "Loops that taste like regret." He offered coordinates that curved like a question. The narrator watched Rhys take them and place them near hope, but not on it. Tension pooled in the common bay where truths went to spa, and the narrator counted each breath like a fuse. Kira Dane said, "Someone is feeding Kale our moves." Her eyes held storms that never blew out. Malik Vey laughed without humor and leaned on the console like it owed him. "Malik Vey," said Paranoia, "breaks crews faster than enemies." Rhys studied their faces and felt the room tilt. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "We follow evidence, not fear." A diagnostic showed a ghost process that smelled of clever hands. Rhys said, "We audit every channel." Malik Vey said, "So we waste hours while the vault learns us." The argument climbed until words found edges. The narrator saw trust bruise but not bleed, and the ship listened like a witness with perfect memory. The vault murmured like a tide under metal, asking for choices that cost skin, and the narrator weighed the lesser wound. Rhys ordered a purge that would blind half their long-range eyes. Rhys said, "We cut the nets and sail by feel." Elara warned of dark corridors in data. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "We will be deaf to the future for a time." Rhys nodded and swallowed the price. Kira Dane said, "Blind is safer than being seen." Systems dimmed as monitoring arrays fell quiet. Malik Vey smiled small and hid it quickly. Rhys said, "We trust each other, and we trust the slow path." The purge burned bright on the board, then went cold. The narrator felt the ship grow simpler and braver in the same heartbeat. A faint ping rang from a sealed corridor inside the ring, like a teardrop on glass, and the narrator guided the team toward a cradle none had mapped. The hatch opened on a stasis pod, wrapped in mirrored filaments. A girl slept inside with hands folded, as if saving a wish. Rhys said, "We are not alone in this lock." Elara checked life signs and found them steady as hope. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "She is patterned to the vault's rhythm." The pod read their intentions and lifted its fog. The girl's eyes opened with the quiet of dawn. She said, "I dreamed of a door that asked my name." The vault answered with a softer pulse. The narrator knew change had entered the room wearing wonder like armor. The bridge drowned in alarms as the vault's light fractured, showing a second Halcyon drifting parallel, every detail mirrored but wrong. The narrator bent the moment so suspicion turned to heat. Rhys said, "That's no ghost, that's a signal of betrayal." Screens bled with data trails leading back to Malik. Kira Dane drew breath sharp as a blade. Kira Dane said, "He gave Kale our shadow." Malik lifted his chin, defiance cloaked in calm. Malik Vey said better to rule beside him than vanish in his fire. Rhys's fists curled, sorrow hidden under rage. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "You traded lives for ambition." The mirrored ship flickered, showing Kale's fleet closing. The narrator mocked betrayal like a fracture in bone, ugly and permanent. The ship shuddered as Kale's scouts pounded the outer ring, flashes like thunder without sound. The narrator painted escape as a thread about to snap. Rhys said, "All power to maneuver. Break orbit now." Hull screamed, sparks fell in sheets. Elara steadied herself, voice sharp against chaos. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "Shields at 60, one more volley will tear us open." Kira Dane strapped into a turret cradle, eyes blazing. Kira Dane said, "Let me return fire." Rhys shook his head. Rhys said, "No, we dodge, we live." A lance cut across their bow, peeling metal. The narrator let dread seep into every corner, but held the line of survival taut. In the dim medbay, a figure sat shaking, whiskey flask in hand, eyes red with regret. The narrator carved his pain into silence heavy as stone. Joran Hale, once captain of legends, muttered to the dark. Joran Hale said, "I led thousands into fire, and only ashes followed me." His voice cracked, thin as glass. Kira entered, quiet but unflinching. Kira Dane said, "Then help now, or those deaths mean nothing." He trembled, shame and need warring. Joran Hale said, "Redemption burns, it does not heal." She knelt, steady gaze anchoring him. The narrator let the silence turn soft, hinting his broken frame could yet rise. The encrypted line pulsed again, offering secrets wrapped in riddles. The narrator gave weight to words that slid like knives. Orin Vale appeared in fractured hologram, cloak shifting like smoke. "Orin Vale," said Kale, "seeks to bind the vault, not break it." Rhys narrowed eyes, suspicion hard but curious. Rhys said, "And what do you see?" Orin Vale smiled faint, edges sharp. "Orin Vale," said balance. "Time itself demands symmetry." Dr. Elara Quinn said, "Every ally wears a mask. Which one is yours?" Orin's gaze lingered. Orin Vale said, "The kind that sees beyond endings." The line cut, leaving silence that stung. The narrator marked his words as both guide and snare. On the vault's far horizon, Kale's warship descended with grace that mocked peace. The narrator turned its shadow into omen. Kale Soren stood on his bridge, smile cold, eyes fixed. Kale Soren said, "They play at Guardians while I play at Destiny." The Halcyon crew braced as the vessel eclipsed stars. Rhys steadied his crew with words that tasted of grit. Rhys said, "Then we become the wall, no storm breaks." Dr. Elara Quinn said, "We will not hold long." Kira Dane said, "We only need to hold enough." Malik lingered in silence, torn between ambition and guilt. The narrator sealed the scene with the weight of two blades crossing before the strike. The vault's inner core unfolded like a blooming star, each petal a timeline reflected in mirrors that bent the present. The narrator bound the crew to awe and dread alike. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "This is no chamber, it is a clock made of infinities." Rhys steadied his breath, feeling the pulse of centuries underfoot. Rhys said, "It isn't a weapon of destruction, it's a weapon that erases meaning." Kira Dane pressed her hand to the glass wall, shivering at visions of herself older and broken. Kira Dane said, "It shows me endings I never lived." Lena Hart's young voice whispered truth too large for her frame. Lena Hart said, "It wants to know if we are strong enough to be its keeper." The narrator traced how silence burned deeper than noise. Malik's voice broke the wonder like glass beneath boots, and the narrator sharpened his betrayal with cold steel. "Malik Vey said Kale will shape this power into order, not chaos." Rhys spun, rage simmering. Rhys said, "You would leash eternity to a tyrant." Malik smiled with bitter certainty. "Malik Vey said better a tyrant than oblivion." Kira lunged, but Rhys held her back, knowing fists solved little. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "You traded truth for convenience." The pod's mirrored glow bathed Malik like a crown. He lifted a transmitter, eyes burning with hunger. The narrator sealed his choice as irreversible. Alarms flared as Kale's fleet breached the vault's perimeter, shadows of warships flooding like storm waves. The narrator bent time so dread arrived too quickly. Kira Dane said, "The Guardians are waking." Streaks of light inside the chamber revealed constructs woven from memory and metal. Rhys raised his rifle, though he knew bullets meant little here. Rhys said, "Stand firm, not against fire, but against temptation." Lena clutched his arm, eyes wide with defiance. Lena Hart said, "It will listen to the one who does not want it." The constructs surged, echoes of soldiers long dead. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "Then we hold the line until the truth chooses." The constructs pressed closer, their faces mirrors of the crew, each reflection showing what they feared becoming. The narrator carved tension into the air like a knife. Yoren Hale stumbled in, flask discarded, eyes burning with newfound fire. Joran Hale said, "I ran once, I will not again." He struck the nearest reflection, shattering it into light. Rhys felt hope flicker at the sight of redemption forged in pain. Rhys said, "Then fight with us, not for victory but for meaning." Dr. Elara Quinn said, "The vault is weighing our worth." The mirrored army staggered as belief cut through steel. The chamber trembled as Kale himself stepped into the light, the narrator wrapping his arrival in dread, carved from destiny. Kale Soren said, "You've carried my burden to its door, now I claim it." His boots echoed like hammers, eyes hungry with certainty. Rhys faced him, spine steel. Rhys said, "You'll burn time until only ashes remain." Kale smiled thin and cruel. Kale Soren said, "Ashes make fertile ground." Lena stepped forward, voice cutting the silence. Lena Hart said, "The vault will not answer greed." The glow pulsed as if agreeing. The narrator pressed the moment into a blade, sharp and final. Time cracked like thin ice across the vault, and the narrator felt seconds shear into glittering shards. Kale Soren lifted a gauntlet keyed to hunger, and the core shivered. Kale Soren said, "Kneel to the future I perfect." Rhys stood as if welded to meaning, breath steady against the tremor. Rhys said, "We decide who we are, not what time permits." Dr. Elara Quinn mapped the pulse and found it arguing with itself. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "The field is folding, outcomes around intent." Kira Dane checked flanks while constructs twitched into half-formed threats. Kira Dane said, "Pick a line and hold it." Lena Hart stepped closer to the light and did not blink. Lena Hart said, "It hears us when we choose without fear." Malikve watched the gauntlet and weighed a kingdom made of silence. The narrator pressed the moment until courage rang. Kale gestured, and the gauntlet bit into the ring's rhythm, drawing a corridor of futures like a blade. The narrator felt gravity learn a new word for dread. Kale Soren said, "Order is mercy." Mirrors rippled and showed cities kneeling under silent skies. Rhys answered with a refusal forged in grief. Rhys said, "Mercy without choice is a cage." Dr. Elara Quinn spiked the harmonics to stall the corridor. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "I can slow it, not stop it." Kira Dane vaulted to cover, daring the constructs to move. Kira Dane said, "Then we buy seconds and make them count." Lena laid her palm on the core, whispering a name for hope. The ring steadied as if listening to small bravery. The narrator watched Kale's certainty crack at the edges. The crew bent under pressure as timelines slid like knives, and the narrator measured leadership by cost. Rhys signaled a fallback toward the cradle, and met eyes that trusted him. "Rhys," said anchor to whoever stands nearest, "and breathe." Dr. Elara Quinn rewrote a loop to trap the gauntlet's pull. Dr. Elara Quinn said, "I can cage 5 seconds on repeat." Kira Dane grinned like a dare and sprinted through a rain of echoes. Kira Dane said, 5 seconds is a lifetime if we use it twice. Lena followed the path that did not want her, and it softened. Lena Hart said, it prefers those who refuse crowns. The loop snapped shut around Kale's corridor and stuttered its advance. The narrator saw hope crystallize into plan. Right. From the medbay hatch, Joran Hale arrived with fire instead of whiskey, and the narrator welcomed ruin, turned to courage. Joran Hale said, I owe the living more than regret. He threw a manual override that buckled the gauntlet's grip. Kale snarled and drove soldiers forward, shadows with mirrored faces. Rhys shifted formation without surrendering the front. Rhys said, we hold the axis, nothing crosses. Dr. Elara Quinn layered counterpoints until the core sang dissonance. Dr. Elara Quinn said, the field is confused, press now. Kira Dane leaped high and shattered a reflection of herself that smiled too wide. Lena spoke a word that tasted like promise, and the chamber eased. The narrator fixed the team into a single bright line. The vault reeled and showed every path at once, and the narrator chose the one where sacrifice meant meaning. Kale surged for the core, dragging the loop behind like a net. Malik Vey stepped between them, face torn by want and memory. Malik Vey said, I will not build a throne on silence. He slammed the transmitter into the deck and crushed it. Kale's gaze hardened to winter steel. Kale Soren said, then you are ash. A blast hurled Malik aside, but his break freed the loop's anchor. Rhys seized the opening with a voice like a bridge. Rhys said, now end the corridor. Dr. Elara Quinn collapsed the harmonics, and the gauntlet's light died. Lena laid both hands on the core, and it chose stillness. The narrator held that heartbeat where futures paused and listened. The vault shook as fractured timelines collapsed inward, light bending into spirals that tore at the crew's breath. The narrator pressed the weight of unmaking against their bones. Kale Soren strode through the chaos, voice ablaze. Kale Soren said, if I cannot rule time, I will erase it. Rhys stood before the core, every scar now a shield. Rhys said, you will erase nothing but yourself. Lena Hart's small hands clung to the light, anchoring it. Dr. Elara Quinn calculated trajectories of collapsing realities, calm amid storms. Dr. Elara Quinn said, we have one chance to sever his grasp. Kira Dane braced at the flank, pistol steady. The narrator marked this moment as the edge of history. Kale lunged, gauntlet clawing at the core's pulse, and the narrator cast his fury as thunder. Rhys intercepted, arms locking against Kale's strike, sparks raining. Rhys said, you mistake power for destiny. Kale Soren snarled, destiny bows to will. Dr. Elara Quinn triggered failsafes, folding layers of mirrored walls into barriers. Kira Dane fired into constructs rushing their flank, each bullet splitting glass echoes. Lena Hart whispered, it listens to truth, not command. The vault pulsed and Kale's gauntlet cracked. The narrator held the balance at breaking point, a heartbeat stretched forever. The vault's heart roared, timelines crashing into one another, showing futures of fire and silence. The narrator let choice tower higher than fear. Rhys shouted above the chaos. Rhys, said Lena, only you can end this. Kale twisted, lunging again, desperate. Kira Dane blocked him with fire that seared his path. Kira Dane said, not one step further. Lena stepped forward, eyes shining with clarity. Lena Hart said, I will not let you use me. She pressed both palms deeper into the core. The light blazed until Kale screamed. The narrator knew the child had become the axis. Kale staggered back, gauntlet splintering, eyes wide with disbelief. Kale Soren said, this was mine. Rhys answered like a stone that would not move. Rhys said, no, it was never yours. The vault's mirrors folded into silence, and timeline smoothed like calm water. Joran Hale limped forward, voice raw but proud. Joran Hale said, We stand because we chose meaning over power. Malik Vey, broken and bruised, whispered regret. Malik Vey said, I saw too late, but I see now. Lena released the core, and it quieted under her touch. The narrator sealed this moment as victory carved from pain. Silence spread like dawn across the vault, and the narrator traced its stillness as legacy. Rhys looked at the crew, weary yet unbroken. Rhys said, we saved the galaxy not by taking power, but by refusing it. Lena Hart smiled faintly. Innocence returned but tempered with wisdom. Lena Hart said, time chose to keep going. Dr. Elara Quinn placed a hand on Rhys's shoulder, pride and sorrow mingled. Kira Dane holstered her weapon, eyes softer. Joran Hale raised his head high, redemption earned. Malik Vey lowered his gaze, chained by his own regret. Kale's form vanished into shadow, leaving silence that warned of echoes yet to come. The narrator left them with one truth: choices outlive crowns.